Hello, everyone. This is Heikkila. I'm a professor at the USC Price School of Public Policy at the University of Southern California. And today I'd like to talk with you about Chapter 4 from my book, China from a US Policy Perspective. Chapter 4 focuses on China from a US employment and income perspective. This is an issue that's received a lot of attention in recent years. And this graph summarizes in nicely what the concerns are. And it shows that while import penetration ratios have been rising steadily over the past 6 decades, the manufacturing share of total employment in the United States has been declining. And so there's some inevitable questioning and even assertions whether these are causally related. Would observe, and in particular, how it relates to China. Many of these increasing imports are, of course, coming from China. So one thing to observe from the outset is that China's rise has been really over the last 3 or 4 decades. And this trend has been underway well before that. So that's something to keep in mind, that it suggests that there are other forces at work, including changing role of technology, mechanization, the introduction of intelligent kinds of processes, machine learning applied to different kind of work environments that are affecting the role of labor in manufacturing. As we'll see, one thing that it has done, these trends have done, is that the productivity of US workers in the manufacturing sector has been increasing. And so if you've got fewer workers producing the same or more level of output than previously, then that's an indication of rising productivity, and rising productivity can support higher wages. So let's take a look at what's happening in terms of manufacturing wages. We see that on a kind of global scale, where US manufacturing wages for different years are all indexed at 100, for basis of comparison, we see that really only Europe, and to a somewhat lesser extent, but also significant, is that of Japan. There we find wages that are manufacturing wages that are comparable to those in the US. In the rest of the world, the manufacturing wages are much lower, and including that in China. Now, these data are about 10 years old. So the wages in China have increased subsequently, but that doesn't change the qualitative results, which are that US is a high wage manufacturing country, which, to the extent that one is a recipient of these high wages, is not a bad thing. The question is, what about those who are being pushed out? What about these manufacturing jobs that are lost? As these authors point out, Holmes and Stevens, not all manufacturing plants in the United States are impacted equally by competition from China. The plants that are most likely to be adversely impacted are those, as they say, that trade across space, that produce large volumes of manufactured goods that can be put into containers and shipped all over the United States and all over the world. Because as transportation costs globally are coming down, it invites potential competitors from anywhere in the world to set up those manufacturing plants that can do the same thing, produce large volumes and ship them anywhere on the world, around the world. So the key then is whether the US has high-skilled manufacturing plants that are involved in advanced level processes that are more difficult for other countries to match, and that might therefore sustain higher wage rates for those who are employed. The flip side of that, of course, is that it means that the vulnerable in the United States are those who tend to be low skilled and on the low wage end of things. And this can exacerbate existing inequalities, as we shall see in more detail in just a moment. The other point that's important to recognize, as pointed out by Professor Autour and his colleagues, is that it's not just wages that are impacted by competition from China. It's not just wages in the US, manufacturing wages in the US that are impacted. That in a careful study that they undertook, looking at regional markets, they find persuasive evidence showing that it's the ripple effects of loss of manufacturing jobs impacts the entire local market. And so this competition from China in terms of certain sectors of manufacturing, where those impacts are felt, they're not felt just by people, manufacturing workers in the US who might be under wage pressure. They're felt by the entire communities. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, other studies have shown that for those who do retain their jobs in the manufacturing sector in the US, they tend to be high-paying jobs. And so this emphasis on high-skilled labor, on the one hand, would appear to be the path towards supporting good-paying jobs in the manufacturing sector. The issue then is how we take care of those who are not in that high-skilled category and who may find themselves out of a job as a result. And indeed, we see that the impact on inequality, now this impact may be in part attributable to competition from China, but as I noted earlier, there are many things underway in the US, many factors that are contributing to these trends. And the trend, as shown in this graph, is that income inequality is getting much worse. Over the last 4 decades, we've seen that workers on the bottom 10 percentile, their wages in real terms, these wages have been adjusted into constant dollar terms, have been fairly flat. So in other words, those at the bottom end of the income distribution have not been sharing in the prosperity and growth in the United States. For those at the median income level, of course, the median income levels, of course, are notably higher than the bottom 10 percentile levels, and there has been some growth. So the median income worker has been sharing modestly in the growth and prosperity in the US economy over the last 4 decades, but it pales in comparison to those at the top 10 percentile, where their wages have been rising dramatically over these last 4 decades. So whether it's competition from China and elsewhere abroad in terms of manufacturing, whether it's mechanization and increasing role of technology, or whether it's a fact that our political economy is somehow not geared to address inequality, that is instead geared to production and output in the aggregate, and that there's not sufficient focus within our policy realm of thinking about how everyone within the economy is able to share in this, the prosperity that has been going on. There has been economic growth. It's a question of who's sharing in that. One finding, is studied by Mr. Michael Holt has shown, is that there is a very clear correlation, and his study shows indeed causation between level of educational attainment and employment. The higher one's level of educational attainment, the less likely it is that one is going to be suffering unemployment, experiencing unemployment. And likewise, the higher the level of education, the higher the level of earnings, although one notices that there's a distinct differential between the earnings of men and of women with the same level of educational attainment. Another aspect of inequality that has not been sufficiently addressed. So what to do about it? This very nice, careful study, exhaustive study really, of a program run by the US government called the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program is quite instructive. The purpose of this Trade Adjustment Assistance Program is specifically to take care of workers who are unemployed as a direct result of closings of manufacturing plants that are unable to compete with low-wage manufacturing from abroad. So that's exactly the kind of concern that has been expressed. So the question is, how does this kind of training assistance do? Does it help? This graph, if we look at the blue dotted line, it shows how the income of workers who do receive this training, how that income compares quarter by quarter, 4 quarters a year, of course, quarter by quarter, as they undertake the training and then go back into the workforce. And so the comparison is other workers who have been laid off, who have similar attributes, who have also lost their jobs in manufacturing sector due to competition from low-wage countries like China. And the comparison shows that the training does not pay off in a fairly straightforward sense of an investment, that there's this loss of income while workers who are receive training, rather than going out into the workforce, they're busy receiving the training. And so their income, of course, is lower than their counterparts who are out in the workforce, go out in the workforce immediately and find a job somewhere. And these are aggregate figures. So some people are finding jobs more quickly, others are not. But these are the aggregate results. And it shows that while incomes after the training do return to levels that are comparable with those who have not received the training, there's not a differential afterwards that would compensate for this short run loss. For those elderly workers who are receiving this kind of training, they never recover wages that are comparable to their counterparts who did not receive the training. So, as well intentioned and as this program is, and focused directly on the problem that is of concern to many, it does not appear to be the solution. Instead, what this suggests is that in some ways this is good news. It suggests that that workers who do lose their jobs, the economy is able to somehow reabsorb them and put them back to productive use. That yes, this job has been lost, but other jobs have been gained. And on the whole, these workers are managing, at least, and doing well relative to those who receive this specific kind of training. But as we saw in the prior graph, the overall trend in the United States is nonetheless towards this increasing inequality. And this is one aspect of that larger picture. Another point that we need to consider in the context of employment and income and how in the US and how it's impacted by competition in manufacturing from China trade is that we all as workers have a dual role. We are workers and we are consumers. We work in order to earn income, and then in our role as consumers, we spend a good part of that income. And when we think about wages, when we think about the purchasing power of what we do earn, there's the flip side, which is that these goods, manufactured goods from abroad, from China and elsewhere, because they are lower priced, they actually extend the purchasing power of US consumers. So, as I mentioned in the book, our best evidence shows that about 0.55% of unemployed workers lose their job due to competition from China. So, of course, if you're one of those 0.55%, now just to make things a little easier, think of 0.55% is 55 out of 10,000. So if we think of 10,000 workers, then 55 of those workers are unemployed as a result of this competition from China. Now, at the same time, other studies show that in our role as consumers, there's a gain, an equivalent gain that's 1.05% or 105 out of 10,000. A kind of simple way to think about that is that there's the equivalent of 105 more people who are able to consume a given level out of 10,000. So intuitively, one would think that, well, we've got this loss of 55 out of 10,000, and if you're one of those 55, of course, that can be very traumatic. And as we saw earlier, it's not just those 55, it's the communities that they live in as well. So these impacts aren't so isolated. Nonetheless, let's put that into perspective. 55 out of 10,000. And as we've seen, there is some capacity for the economy to reabsorb those 55 workers elsewhere. Meanwhile, we've got this gain in terms of purchasing power that's equivalent to 105 out of 10,000. So a key question is, intuitively, one would think, isn't there some way that we could use this gain of 105 to somehow compensate for that loss of 55 and still have everyone come out ahead? A Pareto improvement, as it's called. So this helps to reframe the question. Perhaps the issue is not so much about China, but how it is that here at home, we take care of our own. And finally, when we think about this, the role of kind of a dynamic economy that's reabsorbing workers, one of the things that we can see from our studies, from the data, is that, of course, not all regions, not all localities in the United States are impacted the same. Well, there may be some regions that are declining while other regions are growing. So another policy question that arises in this context is, as we look to provide good paying jobs for American workers, should we be implementing policies that encourage workers to move away from regions where there may be fewer opportunities and towards regions and to regions that have growing opportunities, which in many ways is part of the American historical experience. The United States is a tremendously mobile country. And on the other hand, those of us, including myself, who work in urban planning areas, there's an increasing focus on place-based growth, that these regions, these locations are more than just spots upon a chessboard. They are homes. They have history. They have meaning. And leaving a region that does not have much opportunity in order to go find opportunity elsewhere brings in a lot of other factors, such as family, such as history, such as the culture of a place, such as a sense of belonging. And this question of whether one should be looking at moving people to where the jobs are or trying to create jobs where unemployment is high is an area policy area that deserves more well-rounded attention. And the answer is going to depend on how feasible it is to create jobs where unemployment is high. Perhaps the factors that contribute to employment and growth simply are not in place in every location. And it may be that the cost of trying to override those factors through policy interventions may or may not be worth it in terms of the result. So that helps us to understand how the rise of China and its the competition it brings on a global scale through low-wage manufacturing impacts policy issues relating to employment and income here at home.